The sea was quiet that morning, a pale sheet of silver under a rising sun, the kind of day when war almost felt far away. Men aboard the small escort carriers of Taffy 3 moved through their routines, expecting nothing more than another milk run of support flights for the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Then, without warning, the horizon changed. Out of the haze, tall silhouettes began to form layered pagoda masts, the unmistakable outline of battleships built for empire and destruction. For the young aviators circling above, the sight froze the blood. Those shapes did not belong there. Not in this stretch of sea. Not anywhere near these thin-skinned tin can destroyers and the slow escort carriers they guarded. And yet they were closing fast, the spear point of a massive surface force, led by the mighty Yamato battleship herself. What followed would be remembered as the Battle off Samar, a moment when outmatched sailors realized no reinforcements were coming, no armor would shield them, and no one else stood between those battleships and the American soldiers fighting on Leyte. So, the men of the USS Johnston, USS Samuel B, and their sister ships faced a question few in history ever confront. When the enemy is overwhelming and escape is impossible, what do you choose to stand for? In the tense autumn weeks of 1944, the Battle of Leyte Gulf spread across the Philippines like a storm breaking in every direction. American forces had landed on Leyte, and the success of the entire campaign depended on steady air support from small escort carriers assigned to protect the beachhead. Among them was a tiny formation designated Taffy 3-6 escort carriers and a screen of destroyers so light and thin that even their own crews jokingly called them tin can destroyers. None of them imagined they would soon stand between the enemy and the fate of an invasion. The danger emerged from a failure of perception at the highest levels. Admiral Halsey, lured north by a Japanese decoy carrier group, had taken the fast carriers and battleships with him, believing the San Bernardino Strait was blocked. It was not. And under cover of darkness, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force slipped through the strait unopposed, a formation bristling with firepower unmatched anywhere in the Pacific. At its heart steamed the Yamato battleship, the heaviest warship ever built, escorted by 3 other battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Together, they carried more guns, more armor, and more torpedoes than anything Taffy 3 was designed to face. By comparison, the American escort carriers were little more than merchant hulls with flight decks bolted on top. They carried aircraft configured mostly for ground support rockets, small bombs, depth charges, hardly the tools to break a heavy cruiser, let alone stop the Yamato battleship. The destroyers defending them were faster, yes, but they were painfully fragile. Ships like the USS Johnston and the future legend USS Samuel B carried only 5-inch guns and a handful of torpedoes. The inequality was more than stark, it was mathematical. Japanese shells exceeded 3,000 pounds. American shells weighed barely 54. Japanese cruisers fired more torpedoes than the entire American task unit possessed. The escort carriers could barely make 18 knots. The Japanese battle line could press 27 or more. In any naval textbook, the outcome of such a confrontation would be labeled inevitable. But history does not always follow equations. Shortly after dawn, when Ensign Brooks radioed the first sighting report, disbelief rippled across the bridges of the American ships. Yet, as more lookouts confirmed the shapes on the horizon, pagoda masts, long silhouettes, muzzle flashes, Admiral Clifton Sprague acted. He ordered the escort carriers of Taffy 3 to turn southeast toward a distant rain squall, their only hope for concealment. He ordered every plane capable of flight into the air, armed or not, and he told the destroyers to begin laying smoke, creating a wall of shifting gray that might buy precious minutes. As the first colored waterspouts from Japanese salvos erupted around them, men on the decks understood the truth. The battle off Samar had begun, and Taffy 3 stood alone. The opening salvos of the battle off Samar came down like colored thunderstorms, red from Yamato, yellow from Nagato, green and blue from the cruisers behind them. Each towering plume marked the range closing. Each geyser, a reminder that the tin can destroyers of Taffy 3 were being bracketed by guns never meant to fire at ships so small. And then, before Admiral Sprague could issue the order, one man made the choice that would shape the entire battle. Commander Ernest Evans of the USS Johnston simply turned toward the enemy. Evans had told his crew, when he first commissioned the ship, that he intended to go in harm's way. Now he made good on that promise. With smoke trailing and engine straining, the USS Johnston charged directly at the Japanese vanguard. The destroyer's 5-inch guns opened fire at maximum rate, peppering the superstructure of the heavy cruiser Kumano and tearing at her exposed fire control teams. Evans closed the range until he was within torpedo distance and unleashed all 10 of his Mark 15 torpedoes. Minutes later, Kumano's bow erupted, blown completely off, forcing her and Suzuya out of formation. Against all logic, one tin can destroyer had just reshaped the Japanese line. Then came the price. Secondary batteries from the Yamato battleship found their mark. 6-inch shells raked the Johnston, smashing an engine room, shattering a gun mount, and ripping open the bridge. Evans was torn and bleeding, 2 fingers gone. Uniform shredded, yet he stayed at his post, conning his ship through pain and smoke. The destroyer should have fallen out of the fight, but Evans refused to let her die. Inspired by his attack, the rest of Taffy 3's screen joined in. The USS Hull raced forward, launching torpedoes at the battleship Kongo and then at the cruiser Haguro, forcing both to maneuver wildly. Shells crashed around her, tearing engines, shearing rudders, and smashing gun mounts. By the time Hull staggered to a stop, she had taken more than 40 major caliber shell hits and had bought the escort carrier's precious minutes. From the other side of the formation came the USS Heermann, the only destroyer positioned on the disengaged flank. Through smoke so thick the crew could barely see their bow, Commander Amos Hathaway charged straight into the path of 4 battleships. At ranges so close, the shock of each salvo vibrated the hull. Heermann fired her torpedoes, first at Kongo, then at Haruna, and finally at the towering shape of Yamato herself. The great ship turned away, and for 10 critical minutes, the largest battleship ever built was running from a destroyer a fraction of her size. Then, into the heart of the chaos, came a ship even smaller. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, a destroyer escort not built for surface battle, accelerated beyond her design speed, the hull shuddering as if it might break apart. Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland told his crew the truth. Survival was unlikely, but they would do what damage they could. And they did. Charging to within 4,000 yards of the heavy cruiser Chokai, the Samuel B. Roberts launched her torpedoes and then opened fire so rapidly that her 5-inch barrel began to warp. Gunner's mate Paul Henry Carr, mortally wounded, tried to load one more round to keep the gun alive. In that hour, these ships USS Johnston, USS Hull, USS Heermann, USS Samuel B. Roberts became the beating heart of courage at the center of the battle off Samar. They fought like battleships not because they were built that way, but because the moment demanded it. The fury of the battle off Samar reached its breaking point as the ships of Taffy 3 began to fall one by one. The sea around them churned with shattered steel, drifting smoke, and the echo of guns that dwarfed anything the Americans carried. Yet even as their decks burned and their engines died, the tin can destroyers held the line longer than anyone thought possible. The USS Hull was the first to succumb. She had charged through curtains of waterspouts, closing to torpedo range twice, forcing Japanese warships to dodge and weave instead of pressing their advantage. But the combined weight of battleship and cruiser fire eventually found her. More than 40 large-caliber hits ripped her apart, engines wrecked, rudder jammed, guns silenced one after another. Commander Kintberger fought her until she rolled and went under, taking 253 of her crew with her. Hull did not survive the morning, but the minutes she bought changed the course of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The USS Samuel B. Roberts was next. Her torpedo attack against Chokai had shaken the cruiser so badly that the Japanese gunners could scarcely track her. But at such close range, return fire was inevitable. 3 8-inch shells tore a 40-foot gash in her side and destroyed what remained of her engine power. A fourth obliterated gun mount, 52, where Paul Carr's crew had been firing at twice the designed rate. Mortally wounded, Carr clutched a 54-pound shell against his chest, begging to load one more round. Moments later, the little ship that had fought like a battleship rolled over and disappeared beneath the waves. 89 men were lost, but her courage echoed across the fleet. The USS Johnston remained in the fight longest. Crippled, bleeding oil, listing, and nearly powerless, she emerged from her own smoke to face a Japanese battleship at point-blank range. Commander Evans, torn and burned, shifted steering to the aft compartment and shouted commands through an open hatch as men manually cranked the rudder. Surrounded by destroyers that hammered her from all sides, the USS Johnston continued to fire until her last gun went silent. At 9:10 a.m., she began to sink. Evans was last seen helping wounded sailors into rafts, refusing evacuation. His body was never found. To the east, the escort carrier Gambier Bay fought her own impossible battle. Tracked relentlessly by Japanese cruisers, she endured hit after hit until she capsized and became the only American carrier ever sunk by surface gunfire. Yet even in her final hour, she absorbed blows meant for the other carriers fleeing toward the rain squall. When the shooting finally slowed, the survivors of Taffy 3 found themselves adrift in a sea that had turned strangely quiet. The sky cleared, revealing the silhouettes of retreating pagoda masts on the northern horizon. Against every reasonable expectation, the Japanese were withdrawing. The Yamato battleship, once the symbol of imperial naval supremacy, was turning away from a smaller, shattered force that had no business surviving the day. The cost had been devastating. Hundreds dead, ships lost, and sailors left floating in shark-infested waters for nearly 2 days. But their stand had accomplished the impossible. The path to the invasion fleet at Leyte remained closed, guarded by the courage of men who chose to fight when mathematics promised only death. In the hours and days after the battle off Samar, the United States Navy struggled to understand what had happened. The arithmetic of naval warfare said one thing, the outcome said another entirely. Senior commanders who read the early reports were stunned. Admiral Chester Nimitz called the stand of Taffy 3 the finest hour of the entire Pacific War. Admiral Halsey, whose northward pursuit had helped create the crisis, reportedly wept when he learned how close the Japanese had come to smashing the invasion. Only the defiance of a handful of tin can destroyers kept the Battle of Leyte Gulf from becoming a catastrophe. In the years that followed, American naval institutions studied the battle with almost reverent attention. At the Naval Academy, midshipmen pored over the actions of the USS Johnston and USS Samuel B. Roberts, learning how initiative at the tactical level can outweigh even the most lopsided balance of firepower. Destroyer school instructors pointed to the battle as a template for asymmetric naval warfare, how smaller forces, using speed, smoke, aggressive maneuvering, and sheer will, can fracture the momentum of a far stronger fleet. And aviation historians noted how even unarmed aircraft diving repeatedly without ammunition disrupted targeting solutions across a Japanese line that included the formidable Yamato battleship. Across the Pacific, Japanese officers reached conclusions that were both more technical and more personal. Their after-action reports cited failures in coordination, poor communication, and the confusion caused by Kurita's earlier losses. Yet in private writings, many admitted something deeper. They had been psychologically defeated. They could not reconcile the ferocity of Taffy 3's defense with the ships they were facing. Their recognition manuals listed no escort carriers like these. Their gunnery teams believed they were firing on fleet carriers and heavy cruisers. No navy, they thought, would defend tiny ships so desperately unless they were shielding something far more powerful. In this way, aggression became deception. Courage itself became a weapon. The broader world drew lessons too. Military colleges studied the battle off Samar as proof that leadership and morale can shift the direction of a war. Strategists pointed to the American resolve as the intangible advantage that technology alone could never replicate. And for veterans who lived through the Pacific Campaign, the story crystallized something essential about their generation, that ordinary men, given an impossible choice, could still rise to the demands of history. When the smoke finally cleared over the waters east of Samar, the sea held its silence. The waves rolled gently, as if the violence of the morning had never happened. But beneath that calm lay a story that would echo far beyond the battle off Samar, a story of small ships that stood against impossibility, of men who understood that courage sometimes demands everything. In the years that followed, families waited for word, and the Navy searched the deep. Some answers came decades later. The wreck of the USS Johnston was found more than 20,000 feet below the surface, its bow section upright, gun mounts still trained outward as if keeping watch. The USS Samuel B. Roberts was discovered even deeper, her torpedo tubes empty, her hull scarred exactly as the survivors had described. These ships lie in darkness now, beyond sunlight and tides, but they rest with dignity. They are the quiet monuments of Taffy 3, reminders of the morning when the weak held back the strong. On shore, the memorial at Fort Rosecrans in San Diego carries just 3 names: USS Johnston, USS Hole, USS Samuel B. Roberts. Most who pass by do not know that those ships once charged a fleet led by the Yamato battleship, or that their sacrifice protected thousands of soldiers at Leyte. But for the aging survivors who gathered there each October 25th, the memories never faded. They spoke of friends who didn't return, of decisions made in seconds that shaped the fate of a campaign, of the quiet truth that courage often comes from ordinary men at ordinary moments. The legacy of the Battle off Samar reaches beyond naval history. It speaks to anyone who has ever faced a moment where retreat seemed rational, but standing firm felt necessary. It reminds us that in the darkest hour of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, it was the smallest ships, the tin can destroyers, that held the line. Their story endures not because of the weapons they carried, but because of the resolve they embodied. If this chapter of history moved you, consider sharing your own reflections. What lesson do you take from the sailors of Taffy 3? Do you see echoes of their determination in today's world? We read every comment, and if you want to continue exploring these untold stories of World War II, the moments where ordinary people shaped the course of history, subscribe and join us. The battle may be over, but the history is still being written. Together, we remember those who refused to yield, those who carried honor as their only armor, and those who proved, on that morning off Samar, that courage can still change the world.